Okay, elementary art methods, basic art skills, drawing. Assignment number 1. Kids love to draw, they absolutely do. And it's a basic fundament for every other media use that you're gonna be doing with kids. And so we'll start with line work, I think, because it's really the basis for all value in drawing. And so I've made several boxes here, and I have them each identified in terms of what type of line we're gonna fill these with. And so you should follow along by trying to get just a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, squared out like this, identify those areas, and then we'll get into value here in a second. So I'm using drawing pencils, but you can use any type of pencil. In fact, I like to use an Eversharp pencil most of the time when I'm drawing. So it doesn't really matter, so long as you can create a mark, right? You also need an eraser if you don't have one. So I'm gonna start first with hatching. I feel like hatching is probably the fundamental and most basic type of mark making. So, you know, a single line, you know, it's a mark with 2 points, a line that draws between. What we do here is we create value using line work, and the idea is that we're creating lines that are parallel to one another, and the closer these lines are to one another, the darker that the value appears to be. And so if I put them much closer in this corner, by going back over them and repeating the same direction of line, do the same with this corner, it actually kind of starts to create a bit of an illusion of depth. So it's darker here, lighter here. So it's gonna kind of start to look like it's almost a curl or a fold or something like that. Cross-hatching is used to develop darker values than this. So we do the same thing as with hatching, but we change it up a little bit by adding darker value. So I'm gonna go through this box and I'm gonna create parallel line work. You notice that I'm kind of using the natural curvature of my hand, so if you're a lefty you might want to try it the other way. But cross-hatching is where you go with parallel lines like this, and then you come across it at least in one different direction. You can go several. Many artists use several different directions to try to obtain, or rather attain, darker values. So I sometimes like to angle it just a little bit. Like I'm gonna work on building up my corners kind of like I did the last one, just so I can practice a little bit with trying to control my pencil and make it display some different values. So drawing is not this big scary thing that everybody thinks it is. It's about practice. It's about control between your brain, your eye, and your hand. And so it can be very soothing as well. Again, children love to do this because it's their way of sort of inventing imagery and representing it. So that's hatching, cross-hatching. Scribble gesture is a lot more loose, and so I like to turn my pencil like this, and essentially I'm just gonna be kind of messy, but I'm gonna kind of try to control it within my box as best I can. And I like to teach my kids how to use this pencil grasp early on, because a lot of times when you're drawing like this, you draw a little too heavily, and it makes for the values, it makes the values go a little bit darker than you want them to be. So a lot of times I like to have them start with this and get a good feel for it. I have them roll it between their fingers like this. There's not a single prescribed way to draw. There's so many different ways, but some of these are helpful. So again, I'm building up values by going back over, and so I'm trying to make it darker here, lighter out here. Okay, so contour or outline is basically how you describe something from the outside. And so if I wanted to describe a very simple form like a heart, say, we can tell what that symbol is really simply with just a line that creates a shape like this. Same with like a sphere perhaps, or a circle, triangle. Okay, so basically contours are just a simple line outline. So we like to move on with art in topographic. So if I draw a contour line and I try to represent like some kind of a shape like this, and I want to turn it into a form, I can shade it, or I can go in with topographical lines, which is where I repeat the contour, but I just come inside just a little bit. Again, this is good for controlling your pencil and really working with the joints in your hand to make sure that like your pencil's doing exactly what you want it to do. So we do this to show layers, like if a tree were chopped in half or something, you can see the rings, or if, like, you know, you want to demonstrate ripples in water. You'll see these on a lot of maps, because each one of these lines will show elevation. So topographical is sort of a good relationship to contour. Another good way to work with line work in value is to do lighter values with broken lines or stippling. So stippling is where you literally create a lot of dots. Kids seem to like this because it makes a noise. So you could always tell when my students were stippling, because you could hear it really, really well. And so by building up all these little tiny marks like this, it's kind of like showing a halftone, like on a photocopier. It creates lighter values. Broken lines is basically where you would draw a line, but you lift your pencil every so often to develop a line that would be lighter than a regular hatching line like this, because now we see all this white space in between all these. So this is a good one that I have kids practice for texture and for value control. Cross contour is really great for showing volume. So I'm going to start with the circle, because the circle is really easy for kids to draw, and it's very easy to make it look dimensional. So with cross contour, I have a contour line that shows the outside of this circle. I want to turn it into a sphere. So I kind of imagine that I would have latitude and longitude lines that would wrap across this form. So I have to think about how dimensional this might be. So each line sort of represents what, again, those latitude lines would look like. Same with longitude. A lot of times I'll bring out a globe for the kids to look at and observe, so that they can see how these lines wrap around a form. So it's a good way to create volume as well. So after practicing these different types of line, let's go ahead and talk about value. So value is black, white, and then grays in between. Typically, we have 10 of those values, but I like to simplify it for children because it's much easier for them to think about a group of 4 instead of, you know, so many different nuances between 1 to 10. So what I do is I have them create a simple value scale like this. One's already finished for them, because if they have this rectangle and it's supposed to be white, as long as there's no graphite or pencil marks in here at all, whoops, then it's got the white value in there. So that looks good. I like to start with the darkest value. It seems to be easiest for kids for some reason. And so I just think about controlling my lines back and forth in between the boundaries that I have for the square, the rectangle that I've made. And so the idea is to try to pass it back and forth such that I'm filling in every white space. And since we want this black, we're going to go across it several directions. So this is where the cross hatching comes into play. And I'd rather build my values up than draw them really heavily in the beginning. Sometimes I'll come across it a diagonal way to really push it even further. But I'm really picky with my kids about this. I make them go in and look at all these little spaces here. How can you make this as black as possible? Because when you're drawing, you want to create an illusion of depth on a two-dimensional piece of paper. And sometimes you need to use black to create shadows or really dark areas to create that illusion effectively. So after I've gone over it several times, I feel like I've got pretty close to black. I could go in here and deepen this if I wanted to, make the video longer, but I'm probably going to stop here. 3 needs to be lighter than this, 2 needs to be lighter than 3 will be. And so what I'm going to do is start again by just working my pencil back and forth. And this does take practice, so if you feel frustrated, don't. Just try it again. You'll get there. Then I come back across it. Now I'm going lighter now because I'd rather build this up. I don't want to have to erase any graphite or pencil marks off of here. So I'm just trying to make this a really consistent value that appears to be lighter than 4. So once I feel like I'm there, then I'm ready to move on to 2. So now I move into 2. And again, at this time, I want to build it up slowly. The main thing is to stop before it hits this value here. It should look nice and light. And if they look too close to you, like mine are very close, now I think, okay, maybe I need to go back into 3 and make that a little bit darker. So this is a good way for kids to demonstrate that they can make those values, and when it's time to draw something that looks realistic, they can use these values to help describe those shapes and forms that they see. And again, one should be white. So 4 values, the different types of line, and then the next exercise will be all about shape and how to make a dimensional looking drawing.